We recently, well, I say recently, in August, had a roundtable discussion with all the hosts about how the state kills dissidents. And this is dated, if we can scroll up, 27th of August. We discussed this as the riots were going on in Britain, shortly after they sort of ended, really. They fizzled out, didn't they? And the point of this was saying that, you can jail these dissidents for sometimes quite questionable things and send them to prison, and the formal punishment isn't necessarily the actual punishment. And what do I mean by this? Well, this video is a good means of explaining.
And people are being told that if they do appear, whether they're pleading guilty or not guilty, they're very unlikely to get bail. And if they do end up in prison, somebody who knows about these things told me that, any right-wing, far-right protester landing up in jail, they can expect a pretty cold reception from what he says are Asian gangs inside prison who will be looking out for them.
So that's pretty ominous all on its own, isn't it? Would you be able to...
Yeah.
I've got it. There we go. Never mind. So that seems like a realistic warning, really, that these British people, nationalists perhaps, I don't know how you want to describe them, but the people that were out on the streets during the riots are obviously a very different group than who is populating our prisons these days. There might be some overlap, but I imagine not as much. And particularly because a lot of them went on up north, these... riots and rioters who've been arrested are probably going to go into prisons that are more or less run by Asian gangs, and that their safety is going to be compromised at all times.
Asian, what, South Koreans?
Yeah, that's right. It's just the Japanese,
Sri Lankan gangs.
The Yakuza. No.
Tamil Tiger gang.
Normally Muslim.
Oh, right. Okay. All right.
And of course...
Islamists. Okay.
They were the one faction that went out in their droves to counter a lot of the protests and actually caused real tensions. There was quite a few of them seen with weapons. I saw examples of them even in, protests where there were no mosques nearby that they were defending, but they still pulled knives, machetes and things like that. And also them getting annoyed at the police being there. They're like, we can sort out ourselves, we don't need you. And obviously the implication there is we can kill these people, we don't need you here. What are you on about? They've got no weapons, we have weapons. You're just in the way, stopping us.
The police are like, would you mind
they asked them politely
your weapons in the local mosque?
They asked them very politely to put their weapons away in the mosque.
Madness, absolute madness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you do or say anything about it.
Mm-hmm. And so
you go to prison and then...
This is a sort of blueprint that lots of other governments can employ, because I'm imagining that we're going to see a lot more of this, whereby our prisons have always been pretty overcrowded. There's not a particular need to do it, and therefore the notion of releasing lots of prisoners, there's a new prisoner release soon, I believe, that was announced this morning. Another 1,100 police being released? No, prisoners. And they're not releasing the police. And they're releasing all of these prisoners to put in more dissidents. It's not that the prisons are overcrowded. There's no problem, because we can see, actually, if anything, there's no change in how overcrowded the prisons are. And also, why should we care about the state of, the conditions of prisoners, ultimately? If they've broken the law, oh, boo-hoo, it's a bit overcrowded. Well, you shouldn't have done it then. I'm not going to lose sleep over, there's a man too close to me in the prison. Tough.
Can build hundreds of thousands more homes to put Albanians and Somalis and Bangladeshis and Pakistanis in.
It's funny how that works.
But can't build a new prison.
No.
Can't build a new prison.
Well, the elephant in the room is that a lot of the prisoners in our prisons are foreign, and that would require deporting them. And
can't do that. No.
We can't deport our precious foreign criminals, can we?
We can't deport foreign criminals, and we can't build any new prisons.
Of course.
Both those things are off the table.
Yeah, they're definitely not reasonable things.
Okay.
But what I'm trying to say here is that these prisons are being cleared for political dissidents, and they're going to be imprisoned on spurious charges, and there are going to be conditions created that are going to be so adverse that it's pretty inevitable that worse things than imprisonment are going to happen to them. You know how when there was the Trump assassination, people said it was stochastic terrorism, that they made the likelihood of a random person taking a shot at Trump and killing him far more likely by their actions without directly doing it themselves. It's a very similar thing here with political dissidents in Britain, and I think this will get used in a lot of Western countries as well. I think we're sort of a pioneer in a way, although we will talk about January 6th as well, briefly later. But it seems to me that they know the treatment that these sorts of people will get in prison from these largely foreign criminals, people they want to deport, and that a lot of the time there are prison shankings and people get stabbed and they're going to have a massive target on their back, right? And the funny thing is that they're more than happy to take paedophiles and remove them from the general population because they get harsh treatment. But if it's a British person that's convicted of, say, rioting, that's very, very different for some reason.
Yeah, just throw them in a prison in Hull with a load of Muslims.
Exactly, yeah.
They'll be fine.
So it's also worth mentioning the prisoners that they're releasing are being picked up in Rolls Royces and Bentleys, and one of them even said, "Big up Keir Starmer." And look at them, look. These are the people we want on the streets. Unbelievable. But it's also
it's a commie tactic 101 though. In lots and lots of communist
Lenin
countries.
did it, didn't he? In the Russian Revolution.
Loads of people did it, yeah. The communists in the Spanish Civil War. There's lots and lots of examples of where the communists just open the prisons. Mm-hmm. Because they're looking to destroy the fabric of society.
That's how you know they're bad, by the way. If you release lots of murderers on people, you're a bad person. It's not that difficult, really.
It's like, it is sort of a war on the people. Mm-hmm. Because they need the people to be cowed and to absolutely do as they're told, to need the state at every possible moment, every possible rung of civilization.
It's funny how a lot of countries are now disarmed and we've got to defer our own protection to the state, isn't it? So that gives them an enormous amount of power, and if they want to impose criminals on us, they can, and there's nothing we can do about it to protect ourselves without becoming a criminal ourselves.
So if you look at Bukele, mm-hmm. he's sort of done the opposite. No, I will build a couple of massive prisons or a few giant prison complexes and round up all the criminals, all of them.
I mean, they
and throwing them in prison for a very, very long time.
Faces. It's about as easy to spot a criminal as humanly possible because they show it.
And his country went from one of the most violent and dangerous to one of the least. Mm-hmm. It's got sort of an 89% approval rating.
One of the most massive transformations of a country's crime rate in human history.
Yeah, right, yeah.
It's an absolute phenomenon.
So he's doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually a leader who's got the safety, the best interests of his people at heart. And in the West, or certainly Keir Starmer's Labour, it's the opposite. Of course not. No.
Mm-hmm. No, very much so. And
anarcho-tyranny.
In fact, dozens are being freed by mistake as well. And
what?
And one of the people.
What?
This was a while ago now. This was in September. And one of those people who was released by mistake reoffended within hours and committed a sexual offence. So the government was directly responsible for a sex offence there.
Oh, just one more life ruined.
Yeah.
That's fine. Just one more life ruined.
So let's take us to this man here. So he was involved in the riot in Rotherham. And the BBC reports that he died in prison. And that word... Yeah. So we can't use the actual word because this is going to go on social media platforms.
He just shuffled off this mortal coil.
So the reality, as I pointed out, is he... I'm going to have to use a euphemism here because of the algorithm picking it up. He unalived himself, right?
You can't say that.
No.
Really?
No, you're not allowed to.
Really?
It's ridiculous, isn't it?
That's absurd.
I know. Because if you even say that word, it perceives it as if you're trying to encourage it or you're bringing it up in people's minds. It's like, no, obviously don't do it. But you should be able to talk about it without having to censor yourself. It's silly. But a lot of the mainstream media presented it as he just died, but
Just died.
But no, it was that he was driven to this. And if we actually have a look here, GB News does report on this, because they say a source told the Telegraph. Of course, the Telegraph is paywalled, so you can't see that. So the only article that actually tells you and is publicly available is the GB News one here, that tells you he's believed to have taken his own life. You wouldn't have known that if it wasn't for this. Lots of the other outlets didn't report that.
The impression I got was just that he was alive and now he's not. And that's it. That's all you need to know. Next thing, move on.
So,
don't ask why.
Hang on, I should have a link to the BBC article here. I'll click on this one quickly. So I wanted to have a look at this because, well, what did he do for a start? So I'm going to read from the BBC. This is how the BBC presents it, okay? Family man Lynch, who suffered a heart attack earlier in the year, also had been diagnosed with diabetes, had gone to the hotel to protest against immigration. His defence barrister said he had a general conspiracy theory against anyone and any form of authority, sounds like my kind of guy, and had taken placard referencing the deep state and the space agency NASA. Not exactly, it's sort of boomer tier sort of conspiracy theories, isn't it? That, when you're talking about NASA in particular.
Worried about immigration into the US and NASA.
Well, the deep state, I imagine, includes here as well, doesn't it?
Right, yeah.
But
Anyway.
So, video played to the court showed Lynch revving up the situation before it turned violent and calling the police scum. That's it. That's all. That's all they say he did.
Oh.
And he was serving 2 years and 8 months for that.
Seems a bit harsh.
It does, doesn't it? So obviously he had some health conditions, but he did also have a family.
Well,
he was driven to what he did because of what the state did. And I imagine the situation in the prison, because I believe, he's in HMP Moorland in Doncaster. I imagine Doncaster is going to have a very diverse prison population that isn't going to be nice to a 61-year-old English man involved in those sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be incredibly hostile.
From what I've just heard there, I don't know his case. I don't know anything about other than what we've just heard about what he actually did. But from the strength of that, it doesn't sound like it warranted a custodial sentence at all. But okay, so he went in there and then was driven to extreme lengths.
Yes. And that to my mind...
Just another family ruined. Just another life lost.
To my mind, that seems like the part of the intended outcome here, because they clear the prisons out to put people like him in who haven't really done that much. Many of the prisoners they're releasing have done less than he has. And because of the conditions, the continual threat, and probably the despair of the injustice of the whole thing...
Apart from his family, apart from the injustice of it all, the poor Lynch family, apart from the injustice of everything along the line, what about the actual despair of the man himself?
Yeah, because putting yourself in his shoes, he must have been hopeless, right?
I mean, 61, that's not that old. He could have had a good
life,
few years left.
Yeah, he would have been able to live to see outside of prison. That much is seeming... I don't know how bad his health conditions were. Obviously, he had a heart attack and diabetes, which isn't ideal. But, when you're in prison, at least you can focus on taking care of yourself, if nothing else.
On some level, they do want you gone. People like him, people like us, gone.
Of course they do, yeah. And to talk about the US, obviously we've got a line of merch for the upcoming US election. Seems a bit... macabre to talk about that now, but it was the only point I could put it in. Don't crop that. So obviously we've got...
It didn't even occur to me.
So we've obviously got lots of Trump merch. I really want the Trump grilling t-shirt personally, so I'm looking forward to getting one of those. So get them while they're gone, because after the election they will be gone. So they're limited edition. But anyway, obviously I did a lot of work on January 6th in the United States. And they've got a very different philosophy of dealing with prisoners. It's not quite as... it's not quite the same methodology that our state is employing. So obviously we did a lot of work. We plotted what happened on January 6th to the minute, and it stood the test of time. No misinformation in there, unlike lots of other outlets that say that they fact check but don't really. And also, I had someone on the ground taking pictures of the whole thing, including the rear entrance where all the violence was. These are pictures exclusive to Lotus Eaters. So, we did a lot of work on it, and I've interviewed Edward Jacob Lang, who was the January 6th prisoner facing the most charges, and I even had a follow-up interview with him. So the first one was July of 2022, and this one was September of 23, and what he told me about the condition of the January 6th prisoners, because this was really illuminating to me, is that basically they've been sat awaiting trial for such a long time now. Loads of them haven't even faced a trial, and they've just been held in prison, high security prison,
held on remand, what we would call.
Yeah.
Held on remand.
Not having a trial, with no sort of date in sight really. It keeps on getting pushed back. They're held in isolation, not really allowed to see their families very often. They're basically being held with no one but each other, away from the entire world, and without any end in sight. And so what Jacob was telling me here, Edward, was saying here, was that a lot of people were giving into despair and saying, I don't, Trump's abandoned us. I don't know whether I believe in any of this anymore. And he still was holding on. He still believed in being an American patriot. He hadn't given up. But the idea is, if you just put people in a hopeless situation, it eventually erodes their resolve. It's like keeping a rat in a bucket of water with no sign of escape. Eventually it will stop swimming voluntarily. And it's that same philosophy. It's a different philosophy to the British one, which seems a bit harsher really. But
I mean, they're obviously political prisoners, aren't they?
They are, yeah.
Like the Czechs in the Soviet Union, in the various archipelagos of gulags. Just keep you there until you're entirely broken.
So rather than killing you off, they're instead just waiting to crush your resolve. It seems like that's the case in the US at least, and that's two potential ways in which the state can basically crush dissent. They arrest you, they put you in prison, and either await other prisoners dealing with you, or leave you in such isolation from the world that you just give up on what brought you there in the first place. And I don't think this nearly gets enough coverage that it does, because if we saw this from China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, perhaps, we would say, hang on a minute, these people are political prisoners, they're being held, they're not being given trials, this isn't fair. But because it's ourselves, well, all of a sudden we're assessing ourselves to a different standard, and I don't think that is reasonable.
Oh yeah, different men have a different breaking point, of course. I mean, if you look at, for example, political prisoner Nelson Mandela on Robben Island for 30 odd years or more, something in that ballpark. Communist militant terrorist Nelson Mandela.
True.
It's a matter of record what they did. It didn't break him in the end. He got out even after decades. So I just hope Edward Jacob Lang and the other January 6th people hold out, because hopefully the Donald will move their cases along at least, if not just pardon them or something.
Yeah, well,
it's obviously the Biden administration is holding them like a Guantanamo Bay type situation, just holding you there very, very deliberately, or the Department of Justice.
So
is it Mayorkas? Yeah, just holding them there, just like Solzhenitsyn, pure political prisoners. Mad, right? In this day and age, in the land of the free.
A few members of Congress did visit them. I know Marjorie Taylor Greene went and visited them in prison a couple of times. I think maybe Thomas Massey did as well. I can't remember. It was, years ago now. But a couple of further to the right Republicans actually went and visited them and made sure they were okay, and did the best they could within their power, which is something at least. But they are political prisoners, and I don't think the state is going to be above imprisoning more and more people in the future. depending on how things go in the US, certainly in the UK, and other countries in Europe as well. And so I wanted to warn people about this.
So Edward Jacob Lang has been being held on remand for 3 years, knocking 4 years or something now.
Seems like it, yeah.
What did he actually do, just out of interest? Because according to Kamala, that day was as bad as Pearl Harbor and 9/11.
Well, it's alleged that he was fighting with the riot police in the rear entrance, the one where we've got the photos of people fighting with the riot police. That's also where I think it's Brian Sicknick, the officer that died later, seemingly to analogy to pepper spray, was. And so that's what they're alleging. But of course, he's not had a trial yet. But we'll have to see. Went from the podcast to the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you could always follow Dan's series, Brokenomics. This time he's talking about The Wire, presumably the economics of it. And if you want to see all the other things we're putting out, you can always follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.